Good morning, Year 10. This is a fresh start, a fresh term, and an opportunity to crack on with some history. What we've tried to do is we tried to put everything in this video. So, this video is going to take you about 90 minutes to complete. Okay, obviously, the video will not run for 90 minutes. At various different points, I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to give you time to kind of answer the questions. You need to be sitting with a pen and paper. So if you have not done that, please can you pause the video now and go to get a pen and paper. As we go through this video, I'm going to send you to, there's one clip I'm going to send you off to go and watch. That's going to be one of the first things we do. And if you look down in the description underneath the video, that clip, the link to that clip should be in there. All right, so as we watch this, as I said, you need to be taking notes. I might tell you to write a subtitle. I might tell you to draw a table. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to answer a question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video, say goodbye, and then you will have 10 minutes to complete that at the end. So as I said, it shouldn't take us too long. The video is watch at your own pace, stop, start, go through, do complete all the work. It is important. This will be kind of a foundation to your notes that you will need because the expansion into Africa will come up in your exam at the end of next year. So please, as we go through this, make sure you're putting the effort in. Okay. So again, this is new for me. This is new for you. If we have any issues later on, we can clear them up. Let's give it a go. So today's lesson is on why did Britain go to war with the Boers? So we've already looked at Cecil Rhodes, the empire builder. We've looked at the scramble for Africa, and we've looked at the Suez Crisis or the Suez Canal. Suez Crisis comes slightly later. So we've looked at lots of different ways in which Britain is moving and taking up parts of Africa. And today we're going to look at a major conflict in South Africa between the British and the people that believed the land belonged to them. And we're not talking about the native Africans in South Africa. We're actually talking about a group of Dutch Boers, okay? So they're also called Afrikaners. They were the people that arrived there and settled there before the British arrived, and they believe they have quite a big claim to the land. So let's get started. So the Boer War then is very significant to us. It's an example of the British trying to retain control through use of the military. There are so many parallels with the Indian Mutiny that we've already looked at, and that's going to be part of that 8-mark question. So as we go through this, please think about some of the similarities between the Indian Mutiny. Maybe you can do a little star in the column of your work and just make a link to that because it's really important to be doing that as we go through. So the first part of this lesson is I'm going to send you off to watch this YouTube video. So look in the description for this video, right click, open in a new tab. So under the subheading, Boer War, write down as many facts as you can whilst we watch this video. So please click on the video, pause this one, click on the other one. It's about 8 minutes long. And as you go through, I just want you to write as many facts, as many details about the Boer War as that you can. Okay, I'll see you after you've watched the video. Okay, so we're back. So overall, the Boer War or Anglo-Boer War, or there are many different names for this, just like the Indian Mutiny. It was the first major conflict of the century, on an international scale. So it happens as soon as we get into the 1900s. It's happening. The war was fought between Britain and the self-governing Afrikaner or Boer colonies of the South African Republic, which was made up of the Transvaal and Orange Free State. At the outbreak of the war, Britain ruled the South African colonies of the Cape and Natal. So both groups controlled a large portion of the country, and I'm going to show you that in a map very shortly. What I want to do is I want to do a quick link to last week's lesson. So last week's lesson I gave you this picture, the lesson before the term started, and this picture I gave you, and And what you're going to find is after this video has been released, there's another video which takes you through the feedback and what you should have included in this. But some of the emails I was receiving was about this word provenance and whether to use provenance in that question. And the whether to use provenance in the question is covered in my other video, but I just wanted to talk to you about that word provenance. And I want you to pause the video. I want you to go online. I want you to write the word provenance of sources into Google, and I want you to write down your own definition. 2 minutes. Give it a go. Okay, so provenance then. My definition of provenance. Provenance is detail about a source's origin, who wrote it, when, where, and why it was written. So for me, when I'm talking about provenance, the date's important, yes, because if it was written at a different time period, then it comes into question. That person obviously wasn't there, so how can they be writing about something? Where was it written? Again, if it's something to do with British history and it's been written in, Australia, for example, that person, what link does that person actually have to the topic? Why are they writing about it so far away? But I think the most important ones are who wrote it and why was it written. So who was it tells us a lot about their motive. And when we're looking at a motive for a source, we're trying to avoid the word bias, and we talk about things like, what did they have to gain? What was their relationship like with the person or country they're talking about? So in this, it's a punch cartoon. Britain looks powerful. Britain's spending money. The fact that it can spend that much money on the Suez Canal, and we've got the kind of powerful lion holding the key to India. It's very much, the motivation is it's very pro-empire. It's very positive towards Britain, and it's designed to, in a newspaper to make people very proud and very happy about what Britain is doing with the Suez Canal. So it's very pro-Britain, and that makes it very useful to a historian. But we need to be able to judge how useful it is. And if you go to my other video, that'll give you a clarity on what it is that you need to be writing about that particular source. All right, let's get on with the lesson then. So the first thing we need to look at is what did South Africa look like? Now, this is a map from the textbook about what South Africa looked like. If you look at it, you've got the southern parts, Natal and Cape Colony, which are controlled by the British, and then you've got Orange Free State and the Transvaal, which were Boer Free States. Basically, they were controlled by the Afrikaners. They had their own government set up, and Britain obviously wanted more and more. Britain wanted to control this part of the country. Now, this tip of South Africa is also very important because before the Suez arrived, this was the major trade route to get to India. So Britain, by controlling the southern tip of Africa, actually controlled the transport links, which would have been very beneficial to them. So in the 1800s, two groups of Europeans competed for control of land in southern Africa, the British and the Boers. The Boers were descendants of Dutch settlers who had arrived in 1650. They were mainly farmers, and they named it Cape Colony. In 1806, the British invaded Cape Colony, and it became part of the empire. The Boers headed north and established two new colonies, Transvaal and Orange Free State. So if we look at this map then, the British only arrive in 1806, the Dutch arrive in 1650, but the British arrive in 1806, the Dutch arrive in 1650. But there were people in South Africa before that. So we've got, a vast amount of history predating 1650. So that second question, which says who should be in control of Cape Colony, is an interesting question. Is it the Dutch, is it the British, or is it the indigenous people of Africa from a kind of a GCSE history perspective? You've got to think about that as well. All right. So describe what South Africa looked like. Nice and straightforward. South Africa is split into two large subsections. We've got the British controlled sections and the Boer controlled sections. Both have their own governments. Both are in control. You can also say that the Dutch were pushed out of places like Cape Colony and Natal and forced to set up new colonies elsewhere. Second question is who should be in control of Cape Colony? That is your decision. I'm looking for a sentence there. And what tension do you think has been caused between these two? So just pause the video there, take just 2 minutes, see if you can answer some of those questions for me. Okay, so we've kind of gone through the describe what South Africa looked like. Who should be in control of Cape Colony? Again, I'm no more looking for your reason there. Okay, so you can write whatever you want for that, but the word because is necessary. Who should be in control? I think, blah, blah, blah. Who do you think? Because. I think this because. So as long as you've got a reason there, if you think it's the British, then fair enough. If you think it's the Dutch, then fair enough. If you think it's someone else, please make sure you've written the word because. And the obvious tension is that the British, who are more powerful, are forcing the Boers out of that part of the country, which will cause tension. So let's have a look. I want a subtitle in your book. Subtitle needs to be the First Boer War, because there are two Boer Wars. There's the first and there's the second. So the First Boer War, in 1867, diamonds were discovered in the new Boer state. So Britain, after taking over these states from the Boers, were very upset to find that actually land that they didn't control now contained large quantities of diamonds. The British tried to get the Boers to unify their land with the British, but they refused. So the British immediately tried to unify the country into one country, so they could get their hands on that supply of diamonds. The British troops were sent in to force the Boers to submit to British rule, but the Boers fought back brilliantly. Now the Boers actually, are vastly successful during the First Boer War. Okay, the Battle of Majuba Hill in February 1881 was a serious defeat to the British and actually stopped the British. So the British were stopped by one of the most powerful armies in the world was stopped by a small force of men who were farmers. They weren't trained soldiers. They had experience, but they weren't professional soldiers, and they actually stopped the British. So what I want you to do is, under this title, the First Boer War, I just want you to summarise what's happening. Okay, why do you think the British became interested in the new Boer colonies? Think about that rush for natural resources. When you do write the word diamonds, can you please highlight or underline the word diamonds? Because again, that's a really significant thing to include. If you're including something like Majuba Hill, 1881, again, highlight it. That's a key fact that you could include later on and get you some good marks. Please pause the video, 4 minutes, give it a go. Okay, new subtitle, the Second Boer War. So the Second Boer War is more, it's kind of the more famous of the two wars. It's seen as quite a significant moment in South African history. So in 1886, gold was discovered in the Boer state. So we have diamonds earlier, now we have gold, and this is just one more thing the British want to control. Cecil Rhodes, we've already met him, who was at the time was a British businessman. He opened up a series of mines in Boer territories. English workers flooded the region, and Boers felt under threat. So just because it's controlled by the Boers, it doesn't mean that British businessmen can't go in there and start setting up mines. What it means is that because they don't have the support of the British government to be in that country, then the rights of workers and the rights of the businessmen are not protected by the government. The government actually don't want the British there, so they're not going to work with the company. So the Boer leader, who was Paul Kruger, refused to give the British workers any political rights. Political rights in this part of South Africa would mean that they would have the right to vote, and they might be able to vote in a pro-British leader in the Boer state, and Paul Kruger did not want that. Tensions reached their peak when Rhodes, with others, actually tried to overthrow Kruger and replace him with a British leader. So the British decided to manipulate the government in South Africa, remove Paul Kruger, who was a Boer leader. But Rhodes' plan failed. Relationships between the British and the Boers got a lot worse. And the British started bringing in more troops to Cape Colony and placed them along the borders of the Boer states. So it wasn't until 1899 that the Second War broke out. We're going to learn about the war just in a minute. But what I want you to do is, under the title Second Boer War, I just want you to tell me why the war broke out. Okay, you can do that in bullet points for me. Let's say 3 minutes. So, let's have a look at the war then. Now, we've got a large army, a large British army. They are paid, they train, they are professionals, and they're going up against the Boers. So, what type of warfare do you think the Boers could use against the British? Think back to other examples of kind of a large, well-funded, heavily skilled army going up against a a minor force, not in numbers, but in terms of finances, in terms of equipment. So remember, they're highly skilled fighters armed with modern guns who knew the terrain well, but they are not going to win an open battle. So I guess the signals that should be flagged would be to the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese used tactics against the Americans, and those were called guerrilla tactics. Okay. So guerrilla tactics is exactly what is used in the Boer War. So the Boers very successfully use guerrilla warfare tactics. So subtitle in your book then, Boer guerrilla warfare tactics. Okay, so Boer guerrilla warfare. So what I'd like you to do here, if we were in the classroom, I would have kind of jumbled up these and I would get you to label each individual part of the picture. But unfortunately, we're not in my classroom, but we're going to give this a go. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to read around the boxes around the edge, and I'd like you to write down 3 tactics, 3 things that you think gave the Boers an edge in battle. So the first box says no military uniforms, so they easily blended in with local settlers. They got armed with the latest German-made military rifles and artillery. All fighters were mobile on horseback, unlike the British. There were no infantry soldiers on foot to slow down the units. Fighters lived off the land by foraging for food or capturing enemy supplies. The British needed long supply trains to keep their troops fed and armed. And lastly, mainly fought in small groups, 5 to 12 soldiers, so units were hard to detect and moved easily, capturing supplies and attacking troops and communication lines when least expected. So those are 5 examples of Boer guerrilla warfare. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to spend 3 minutes just picking 3 of these out and writing them in your book. They don't need to be in a particular order, but I want you to write 3 in, please. Okay, so now you've finished writing 3 down, I'd like you to complete the question. Why were the Boer fighters so successful against the British forces in the early stages of the war? So I'm looking for a paragraph here, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to complete it. So I want you to use the points that you've just put down. I think, or you could say, sorry, the Boer fighters were so successful against the British forces in the early stages of the war because, you could say, because of their guerrilla tactics. I know this because, and that's where you fill in your examples that you've just included, maybe 2 examples. And then the last sentence I'm looking for is this is important because, and I want you to link it back to the question I'm asking you. So why were the Boer fighters so successful against the British? Pause the video and 5 minutes to complete that task, please. Okay, so new title, please. Let's have a look, a little subtitle in there. Let's have a look at the British responses. So all I want you to do is, as I'm talking, I just want you to note down some of the ways the British responded. The way the British responded was highly criticised at the time. Um, it's still very controversial, and we're going to get on to the last bullet point here. We're going to have a think about that when we get to it. So Britain responded in January 1900 by sending 500,000 troops to fight 50,000 Boer soldiers. So Britain, wanted this land. There is no question about it. Britain sends 500,000 troops to fight 50,000 Boers. That is a huge commitment. Remember, Britain has got a vast empire and it needs its troops to help govern and help keep control. So to commit 500,000 troops to one conflict is very significant. The British Army used high-tech weaponry such as machine guns, modern rifles and high explosive shells. Boers refused to surrender and carried out small raids on British camps, railways and mines. The British responded savagely. So the guerrilla warfare tactics meant that Britain could never engage the Boers in open conflict. If they did, the British would win. But the Boers were smart. They used their environment, they used the land, and they would, when the British were attacking, they would be retreating. When the British were retreating, the Boers would be attacking. And what that meant was that Britain couldn't defeat the Boers, and instead it turned to these quite savage responses. The first one is something called the scorched earth policy. The British soldiers burnt down Boer farms, they killed animals, they destroyed crops, and they poisoned drinking water. The British completely decimated the Boer farming system. Why? Because they thought that if they could cut off the supply, the food, the shelter, the horses, if they could cut that off from the Boers, then they wouldn't be able to survive anymore. The most significant and probably most savage response is concentration camps set up by the British. Now, we all associate concentration camps with the Holocaust and the Nazis, but concentration camps, the word concentration camps were used to describe these camps set up by the British during the Boer War. So the British rounded up Boer men, women and children, and also black servants, and they sent them to these camps. 116,000 individuals were placed in camps. 28,000, mainly children, died due to disease and illness because of poor conditions. I mean, just look at that as a percentage, the amount of people in those camps that died. So the British did not look after these people. The British put them in these camps to keep them in one place. So what I want you to do, I would like you to just pause the video for 3 minutes, and I'd like you to continue to write down some of the British responses. Bullet point form is perfect. Okay, we're going to do a quick pit stop. That means I'm going to ask you 6 questions. These are quick fire questions. You can pause the video if you want to stop and answer the questions. But each question, you should be writing down the first thing that comes into your head. You do not need to write the question down, but please do number them. So the first question, in what part of the British Empire did the Boer War occur? Question 2. Why did the Boers fight the British Empire? Question number 3. What type of warfare did the Boers use? Question number 4. What advantage did the Boers have? Question number 5. How did the British respond? And question number 6. Name one similarity between the Boer War and the Indian Mutiny. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video there to finish those 6 questions. So pause the video there if you haven't already done so. Okay, so the answers to those pit stop questions will be available later, but we are going to keep moving. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the consequences now. Okay, so this is the last part of the video. Shouldn't take us too long. We're looking at the consequences of the Boer War. So as we read through this, the question I want you to answer is, how did the war end? So the war ended in 1902 with both sides exhausted. The Boers were forced to surrender and peace talks began. Boer states became British colonies, but Boers were promised they would make many of the key decisions in the running of the land. In 1910, Boer states joined with Cape Colony to form the Union of South Africa, part of the British Empire. But this was not a colony. Instead, it was classed as a dominion because it ran its own affairs. So South Africa is actually different to most other colonies that the British controlled. As a dominion, it was allowed to retain its own government, and if a country has its own government, it means it can make its own decisions. It also means that the people of that country are represented directly by someone in their government. So although this is not what the Boers wanted, this is they still do not just become a colony of Britain. So how does the war end? Pause the video for 2 minutes and just finish making a note about that. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to copy this table down. Okay, so the title for this table is consequences. You're going to write one half is going to be short term and the second half is going to be long term. If you need to pause the video, please do, to get a ruler and to draw this table in. So let's have a look at short term first. You can note down some of the figures with the deaths and also some of the right hand side. So short term, we're looking at war casualties. Out of 450,000 British soldiers, 16,000 died of disease and only 6,000 died in battle. So actually the war casualties were mainly as a result of illness and disease, which highlights some of the issues within the British Army. For 16,000 people to die of illnesses means that the health of that army would be brought into question. In terms of the Boer soldiers, 90,000 were fighting and 7,000 died in battle. So the actual deaths in battle is very similar, yet there are a lot more British soldiers seem to be dying of illness. In total, there were 28,000 civilian deaths, which is very significant. So it was the biggest 20th century empire war. At first, there was a great support in Britain, with thousands of men volunteering to fight, but the enthusiasm was short-lived. The war showed how determined the British were to hold on to their empire. But as it says, the enthusiasm behind going to war and fighting for your country soon starts to wane, it soon starts to go away. So just pause the video there for 2 minutes just to finish off your side of the table. Okay, let's move on to long-term impacts. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to use this information to fill in some of the stuff on the right-hand side of that table for me. So at first, the British got lots of men volunteering to fight, but over time they started to turning men away. So if you went to join the army today, they would take you through a medical. You would then go through basic training before you were then, you'd go further with the army. But if you were if you weren't eligible to join the army, you would be refused entry into the service. And what the British actually found is they were turning a lot of men away from joining the army. 1/3 of men were being turned away, classed as unfit for duty. And what it revealed was an important issue in Britain. There was a poverty crisis. So these men who wanted to join the army, because they were so poor, they weren't able to look after themselves, and then therefore they were turned away from the army because they were unfit for duty, whether it's to do with malnourishment or ill health as a result of not being able to feed themselves properly. One report revealed that 30% of Londoners were so poor they didn't have enough money to eat properly despite having full-time jobs. So 30% of Londoners, even though they were working in full employment, they didn't have enough money to eat properly, just showing you how little money some people were making. So in 1906, the government decided to act. A number of new provisions were brought into action aimed primarily at children. So the government decided that if they were going to solve the poverty crisis, they should focus on children. And this is where they start to introduce measures that are still in place today. So from 1906, these laws are over 100 years old. So free school meals for the poorest children. Today, children can still get free school meals. Free medical checks and treatments in schools. So we still have a school nurse, which means that our students have access to free medical checks. The teaching of domestic sciences in school, like nutrition, food, clothing, child development, family relationships, and household skills. This is something that is now, it's out of fashion in schools. But there are still schools that teach nutrition and food, less about child development these days. But that's meant a lot. That is covered in biology lessons, family relationship, household skills. Those are things, again, that are deemed slightly more unfashionable to learn about in schools these days. But they were aimed at getting children ready to live in the world. After helping children, the government focused on other sections of society. They introduced unemployment benefit, sickness pay, and old age pensions. 3 staples of our modern welfare state. If you don't have a job, you can get some support. If you are ill, then you get some support. If you've gone past the age of retirement, you still get supported by the government. So as a result of the Boer War, we now have those 3 staples to our welfare state. And the last one is that they started building Britain's first job centres, which today are still, at the moment they're all they're closed down, or they're doing their online meetings. But those are still those 2 bullet points are still in practice today, and that all is a result of the Boer War. So these are long-term impacts. So we could say that in the short term, large amounts of lives were lost, both Boer and both British and civilian. We've got large amounts of people dying of illness. But in the long term, the British government realised that it needed to start investing and helping the most vulnerable people in the country. And they started to bring in these laws, which are now in place today. So just finish off that table. If you need to, pause the video for just 2 more minutes, and we will move on. Okay, so at this stage, we're going to go back to our pit stop questions. All you need to do is you need to mark these, correct them, whatever you need to do. So what part of the British Empire did the Boer War occur? It happened in South Africa. Why did the Boers fight the British Empire? The British were trying to infringe on Boer land. They were trying to unify the country. And with the second Boer War, the British actually tried to overthrow the Boer leadership to replace them with a British leader. What type of warfare did the Boers use? The answer there is guerrilla warfare. What advantage did the Boers have? The Boers knew the land. They were very they were very well equipped to fight a guerrilla war, and they had the support of the people as well, which is really important. How did the British respond? We say that the British responded with their scorched earth policy and also concentration camps. Name one similarity between the Boer War and the Indian Mutiny. There are lots of similarities, but I'd say kind of the big one is that at the end of the war, Britain takes more control. So in India, they remove the East India Company and they take full control. And at the end of the Boer War, we have the British taking full control of South Africa. All right, really well done today, boys. This is the last thing, and this is the where I'm going to leave you. So the last thing I want you to do is to complete this 8-mark question. Okay, the question is compare the impact of the Second Boer War on Britain with the impact of the Indian Mutiny. Now, what I need you to do is I need you to take this question, write it down, and I want you to go and complete it on a computer. Once you've finished it, I want you to submit it to me via Show My Homework, or you can email it to me at a last resort. If you're struggling to get onto a computer, you can write it down and send me a picture. I will accept that this week, but we need to be getting ourselves sorted. So, the question is, how are they similar? Okay, not how are they different, how are they similar? I've given you the point for each one, so you don't actually have to come up with a point. All you've got to do is find an example to fill in my sentences. So an example for the Boer War, an example for the Indian Mutiny, and then a link back to the question. They are similar because. So one way they are similar is because of Britain. Britain gains more control in each country. I've just gone through that. What happens at the end of the Boer War? What happens at the Indian Mutiny? Another way in which they're similar is how the British dealt with the problem by sending over troops. Obviously, they sent troops to the Indian Mutiny. They sent troops. We know they sent 500,000 troops to fight in the Boer War. So I want you to spend 10 minutes. I want you to, put yourself a timer on and make sure you do that properly. And I want you to send that to me as soon as possible. Okay. I have marked your previous 2 weeks. They have been released back to you as feedback videos. I will make sure that there is a link. Check my Show My Homework for the link to that. Send me an email. Let me know how you think this was. Tell me if you've got an idea of how we can improve this. This is, this is a good start. Okay. So good luck with this week's work. Please get this essay to me as soon as possible. It's only 8 marks. It's only 10 minutes. All right. And I hope you have a good week. Thank you very much for listening. All right. Goodbye.